are a very important part of many American households. According to Forbes, 66% of Americans own a pet. That's 86.9 million homes, a number that continues to increase. 97% of pet owners report feeling a strong bond to the point where they consider their pet to be a part of their family, which has certainly had been my experience in owning pets. People care about their pets so much so that they want to spend what is necessary to keep their pets healthy and feeling well. It is estimated that in 2022, Americans spent $136.8 billion on their pets, which is an increase of 11% from the year prior. These statistics highlight the emotional impact on people when a pet gets lost, becomes ill or injured, or passes away. This, for many people, can feel like an emotional pain comparable to losing a family member, because for many people, it really is a family member. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast series for supplemental insurers on the impact of grief for customers. My name is Kay Bird, and I am the Director of Business Solutions at Workplace Options. The topic for today's episode, grieving the loss of a pet, is near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure it is for many of our listeners. To talk about that, I have a very special guest with me in this episode. I want to introduce Kristen Henry, who has worked at Workplace Options as an EAP counselor for 8 years. She is a master's level EAP clinician and social worker and serves as a full-time internal provider offering video and telephonic short-term solution-focused therapy for members. Her areas of focus include anxiety, depression, relationship dynamics and communication techniques, and grief. She is also the owner of an Australian cattle dog named Ace.
Hi there, Kay. Thanks so much for having me today and definitely looking forward to our time together.
Kristen, just wanted to start out. Does a person go through the same stages of grief after losing a pet as they would when grieving a human loved one?
Yes, they definitely can, because grief is something that it's not just something you experience when someone passes away, a human passes away. Grief is the loss of anything you deem valuable. So people can experience maybe more mild grief, but loss of a job or a relationship ending. So grief in its broadest definition is just the loss of anything you deemed valuable. And our pets really are valuable little things, in our lives, these little lives that we take care of. And people can go through the stages of grief with a pet. And coping suggestions are the same when you lose a family member and then a pet. It's talk about it. Talk about the loss with your friends and family. Reach out to a professional to normalize the guilt, the anger, the sadness that you feel. Find a way to honor the pet who has passed and talk about memories of them. People can experience similar physical manifestations of their grief, such as loss of appetite, difficulty sleeping, insomnia, fatigue. You also must consider the pet's role that they play. So they are these little lives that we can take care of. There's a sense of satisfaction when one gets to look after and take care of something. We, feed them, protect one another, share experiences, travel with them. Our pets can help to reduce cortisol levels, the stress hormone that people have. It helps to alleviate depression, and it can actually, having a pet has proven to improve blood pressure. They encourage exercise, of course. You got to take them out for walks, and they can build stronger immune systems for us and reduce our loneliness. So there's a lot of really vital things that they bring to our lives, and they bring a lot of value. So grief is just anything we deem valuable. And when we lose that, it definitely has an impact on us.
It really does. It's interesting when you rattle off the list of all of the benefits of the dog or the pet that you have as part of your life. I just have to comment, again, personally, I just think about my pet was part of my family, and all those things that you said were true, but I didn't think of the entire list. So it's just interesting to hear you share that. I have talked with a number of veterinarians who have learned to create boundaries between empathy and taking on that person's pain, our pain when we lose a pet. How can people differentiate between healthy grieving and the complicated grief, when it comes to the loss of a pet? Because I think, again, sometimes maybe it gets misplaced onto the veterinarian, for example.
The loss of a pet, it's a particular type of grief that's called disenfranchised grief. It's similar to when someone goes through divorce. Disenfranchised grief is a term that's used for when people go through a divorce just because there's still stigma, there's still taboo. The majority of the world is you get a partner, you get married, etc. But losing a pet is also classified under disenfranchised grief. So disenfranchised grief is just a type of grief that's not being socially recognized. So I think that in of itself, it can be very isolating, and people feel that it might be silly to grieve a pet, etc. But complicated grief involves intense and prolonged mourning that may disrupt an individual's life. So they're kind of day-to-day functioning. And complicated grief describes feelings and responses that can be extremely intense and persistent. One can get stuck in the anger stage. That's a big part of complicated grief, is it being difficult to move forward and navigate through the anger. And there's still a lot of holding on to the maybe injustice of, the diagnosis or not being able to pay. And unfortunately, there's a lot of helplessness that comes with that, and that can be projected, onto the veterinarian, let's say. Normal or uncomplicated grief, healthy grief, suggests that a person is processing their feelings in a way that's typical to cultural expectations, while complicated grief suggests that they're not. The terms are not meant to imply that either are right or wrong. Mm-hmm. In healthy grief, though, the person works towards acceptance, or the acceptance stage. People will say that acceptance is the final stage. You've accepted the reality of the loss. But the acceptance stage of grief, and they're able to reflect on happy memories of their pet. That's a huge thing. When you're experiencing complicated grief, it's hard to talk about your pet. You don't want to, accept that they're gone or talk about the memory or their passing. But what may lead people to experience complicated grief is it being classified as disenfranchised and just not being socially recognized.
I could see that. So along the lines of the anger piece that may kind of be a component that leads to that complicated grief, like when cost of care is an issue, right? Or when people feel powerless, what can be done to address any guilt that they may feel over not being able to do something?
The best thing you can do with guilt is to name it. You have to acknowledge it, that it is a normal feeling to experience in this particular situation. So the best thing you can do is addressing it. You acknowledge it. It's a normal emotion. Acknowledge to the pet owner that this is a really incredible, difficult position to be in, to be given, the worst choice that you can be given. So I think that acknowledging that it's a normal emotion, letting them know that they are an amazing caregiver, nurturer, and their pet will not be angry with them. But this is something that you have to talk about. I don't think in that moment, the veterinarian, these are great suggestions and great things to say, but I would encourage the vet to say, we encourage you to seek counseling, or mm-hmm. Here's the name of someone, or, there are therapists who specialize in pet loss. So I think, obviously the vet is not the therapist, so you don't want to put too much of that on them, but obviously they're kind of the first interaction, they're delivering this news. So I think just first naming that guilt is normal and their anger is valid, and you wish that there was another option, but unfortunately, this is a really tough decision that is going to have to be made. But, if they have any medical questions, happy to answer those. But we do encourage you to reach out, to a therapist. I think it's just important not to downplay or invalidate that guilt, even if it's uncomfortable.
Oh, so important. Yes. And it's good to distinguish, as you just said, like the veterinarian can help someone with the medical issues, whatever is needed for that pet, but to really encourage someone to reach out who's in a position to really help you on that emotional component, whether it's grief or anger, like you're saying. So along that line, putting a pet down is an emotionally numbing experience. It's just devastating. Even making the decision to put a pet down takes a toll on all family members. What strategies do you recommend for managing that process?
Yes. So when I heard that question, I thought of even before having to put your pet down, doing things that they enjoy. I've personally done this with pets in the past, have heard of other people doing it, but like having their final day be full of things that they enjoy, and that day just being focused on bonding. So taking them for a car ride, if you want to make your dog a steak, let's say, just for example, the family cuddling on the couch and watching a movie with the pet, then allowing yourself the space to grieve. So there is nothing strange or weird about taking a day off. You've lost a significant member of the family. You've lost this little life that was very valuable to you, brought you a lot of joy, etc. But I even thought of before, but with the toll that can take on having to put a pet down, making sure that you are talking about memories, I think. So putting that pet down, and even in the process, of them being put down, talking about how much they've meant to you, funny memories. I mean, even finding a way to honor them. I know that there are people who will put pictures of their pets up, maybe display their collar, like have it hanging still on the coat rack on the back of the door. I've even seen I forget the name of the company, but there's a jewelry artist who you can send your pet's ashes to, and she'll put it in like a stone, or she'll mix it up and then put it in a ring, and she'll make a piece of jewelry and a ring out of that. I know there's also vets that can come to the home, or when the pet is euthanized, there are services that will come to the home just to make the pet a little bit more comfortable. But I mean, really the biggest thing, talking about memories, talking about, hey, this is a really difficult thing, but especially if it's a terminal diagnosis or the pet is in pain, I mean, it's true to say they're not going to be in pain anymore, and to think of if they had really bad arthritis, like they won't hurt anymore, after this.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I think those are all interesting and really valuable and meaningful suggestions. So thank you. Mm-hmm. And I was at a conference also recently, and one of the discussion topics was that for organizations who are trying to appeal to the younger generation, that bereavement leaves are being extended to people who lose pets, not just, your aunt, your uncle, your parents, but the pets as well, to the point that you're making, like just take a day off and let yourself grieve and remember your pet. So I think we'll see more of that.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add something, the taking time off, people may think, oh, well, it was just a dog, so I just need to go back to work. Again, grief is anything that you deem valuable, when losing that. So when you go back to work, let's say, or rush back to our normalcy, I mean, we do seek normalcy. There's a level of comfort in that. So that's why a lot of people will say, I just threw myself into my job. I was distracted. I got to avoid the tough emotions. But when people do that, there's still that foundation of grief, but we're just adding stressors on top of it. So the longer we do that, and the longer we don't talk about the guilt, the grief, this gambit of emotions that people experience whenever something passes away, it could lead to complicated grief. So that taking a couple days to rest, to sleep in, to cry, to, spend time with friends and family can actually really help prevent experiencing complicated grief.
That's very impactful. I can see now that you've explained it, how that could happen, and just, yes, take time for yourself and let yourself be in the moment. Is there anything that happens specifically when children are involved? Like, how do you help kids manage the process of losing a pet?
When talking to children about death of a pet, it's important to be honest. You also want to use, simple language depending upon their age and developmental stage, and you want to acknowledge their feelings. Avoid euphemisms like, oh, they went to sleep, or they went to, a farm, off in the distance, whatever it might be, or they went to live on a farm. Instead, it is important to use words like death and dying. Like, yes, Lassie died, or she did pass away. You want to tailor the explanation to the child's age. For example, children under 3 might not understand what death is or really understand the concept. So obviously you want to take that into account when explaining what has happened. It's also important to be patient. Grief is a personal experience that can't be rushed, and you want to allow children to grieve without judgment. It's important to encourage healthy coping, such as Do you want to draw a picture of how you're feeling? I mean, you can even incorporate play therapy tactics or expressive arts therapy that incorporates the arts like singing and dance and visual art or writing, but encouraging them to draw what they're feeling or to draw a picture of the pet, coloring, talking about happy memories of the pet. There's also children's books that are catered to talking about pet loss that you can, get at bookstores or buy online. But using those as tools and outlets to help encourage the kid to talk about their feelings, being patient with the questions that'll be asked, but definitely being honest with what the situation is.
So many people feel that their pets really are irreplaceable. And I, can't imagine getting another pet after experiencing the loss of one that they've held dear. So what's a healthy way to manage the process of getting another pet and integrating them into the household?
So I think it's important to know that there's no correct wait time before rescuing or adopting another pet. The love is separate and it has its own space, for this new pet. I think it's important for pet owners to know that by adopting a new pet, whether it's a couple weeks, couple months, couple years, after the passing of the pet before, that it's not a disrespect towards that relationship you had with that previous pet, or it's not a disrespect, towards the memory of that pet. And I think that you can actually tie in that disenfranchised grief, that because pet loss, a lot of people don't categorize it the same as like losing a spouse. I mean, obviously, when a spouse passes away, there's an obituary, there's a visitation, there's a funeral, there's kind of this mourning time. And if you were to make a dating profile before the obituary, that would be very controversial. But a pet is different, It's very normal for when a pet is getting older, people will say, let me get a younger dog, so that dog, they can bond together. But then when the older one passes away, I'll still have a dog. So I think that's important to realize that you really can't apply the same rules to pet loss. That's what I would suggest, is knowing that it's a different kind of grief, and there's nothing wrong with still wanting that bond and comfort that an animal brings, and it's not disrespecting the previous pet.
The long list of all the benefits of having a pet still exists, right? So
exactly.
Very interesting, and it's been very insightful. So thank you very much, Kristen, for sharing your insights with us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
To learn more about WPO products and services, or to share your feedback with us, you can connect with us directly through the Contact Us page on the Workplace Options website. The link can be accessed directly from this podcast page. So again, thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day.